Hello and welcome to Deep Down. I'm your host, Jordan Hunt, and today I'm very excited to be having a conversation with my longtime friend and collaborator and sometime partner in crime, the novelist Lauren J. Joseph. Very excited to share it with you all and hope you enjoy it. Liza Minnelli!
Hello, Liza Minnelli.
Thank you for having us to your very cosy apartment.
Pleasure to have you.
Thank you. How are you doing today?
Overall, quite fine. Maybe tired but wired is a good way to think about it. I usually have quite busy weekends and then try and slow down for the week. And that's here we are on Monday.
Yeah, Monday morning, straight to office.
Hibernation.
Yeah, it's that kind of time of year, isn't it? After our little fake spring. Tell me about Cate Blanchett's face.
That might take up the full hour. Do you specifically mean the piece, Cate Blanchett's Face, or what I have to say about Cate Blanchett's face?
Both.
I saw Cate Blanchett in The Seagull about 2 weeks ago, and she is fantastic. And it encouraged me to share an old piece I'd written for my Substack about her face, because I think it's the greatest face in cinema, because she's been quite clever and only had the necessary work done. So she still maintains a lot of personality, and she's also just a magnificent actor, isn't she, which really helps. And when you bring those two things together, having a great face only delicately reworked together with significant talent, you've got a recipe for success.
I wouldn't actually even have thought that she'd had any work done at all. It's very, very subtle.
Somebody told me it was a mini lower facelift. I love celebrity gossip about people's facelifts. And I also love it when people comment on it, like, I just read this article about what I've had done.
Well, that's literally what this podcast is about, so.
Well, I'm glad to know.
Can we paint a picture of where we are for anyone who's only listening and not viewing this podcast?
This is my gracious drawing room. And we're here on the sofa, which Lord has seen some things and we're constantly trying to reupholster it because it's just really been through the ringer. It's also a sofa bed. Right. So a great many celebrities have stayed here. One day I suppose I'm going to have a blue plaque up saying, like, Elizabeth Taylor slept here.
That's right.
On behalf of this sofa bed. But the thing is, it's perfect for napping on because it's about 2 meters long. So we're here on this sofa underneath a fine selection of bric-a-brac and paperback in my gracious drawing room.
In Clapton Common?
Well, this is a mysterious neighbourhood depending on who you are. If you are Hasidic, it's Stamford Hill. If you move to London to become a graphic designer, it's Upper Clapton. So it can be what you want it to be. Some people even think of it as Stoke Newington.
That's a stretch.
If you're a 50-something lesbian, it's Stoke Newington.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
I know people who live on the other side of the street who call it Stoke Newington.
Really? I wouldn't call it Stoke Newington, but
I have no idea what to call it.
it's not my home, so it doesn't really matter what I
You
think.
can call it something else entirely, I suppose.
But Upper Clapton reminds me of one of our very great collaborations from the past. Because people might not necessarily know just quite how long we've known each other.
Sometimes I struggle with the maths as well.
Yeah, a different life.
Is it not like 20 years or something?
At least, yeah.
When did Confessions on a Dance Floor come out?
Oh, I don't know. I don't remember when I came out.
Before Confessions on a Dance Floor.
Okay.
That's like 2006 or something, I think.
That sounds about right.
I think so.
I graduated from my master's in 2006. And I think at that point I was over contemporary classical music and was trying to see what else there was in the world. Yeah. Turned out there was you.
All thanks to the great fortune of MySpace.
Oh my gosh, MySpace.
How did MySpace funnel us together pre-algorithm?
I don't know, but I also met Theo Adams on MySpace. And that's been a very long-lasting
But surely that was because you knew people who knew people who knew people. because you and I didn't have any connections at all.
No.
When we met each other, we didn't have any friends in common. But obviously, you knew people who knew Theo, so...
I guess so, but it was one of those things. MySpace functioned in a strange way that I don't really recall. I remember having top 8 friends,
Yes.
but other than that...
I think it's because you could click through, couldn't you? You could say, like, oh, that's an interesting picture, and find someone's profile, look at their top 8, and click through and click through.
I guess it was a real network in that sense.
Yeah, you weren't directed. There was no For You page. That's what makes it so random, that we didn't know anybody. We didn't live in the same neighbourhood. We didn't go to the same school. We weren't from the same place exactly.
That must have been fate in that case. Something larger than the internet.
You can only call it that.
But back to Upper Clapton and the Light Operatic Society's summer review of operatic classics.
That was actually the Lower Clapton Light
Oh, was
Operatic
it?
Society.
Oh, no. Golden Years.
Golden Years.
Yeah, which was the name of our first opera.
Yes. And so far only opera. But, you know, the night is young. You've got your pencil ready to go.
I know. I do sometimes think, what will my next opera be about? And I'm always drawn back to you, mainly because you're a writer. And
I have very reasonable rates.
Back then it was free, I think.
It was.
Very, very reasonable.
Maybe we each got a free ticket to our own show or something like that.
Yes, but then of course we had to pay to put the show on. Right.
And buy all the costumes.
Yeah, I remember having a conversation with a tax advisor who said, you can't claim for flowers as a deduction from your tax bill. I said, but they're a prop. She said, no, gifts don't count. I said, no, it wasn't a gift. It was literally the only prop in our opera was a bunch of flowers.
Was it a tax advisor, or was it one of those ladies in Preston that you call up on the line if you Google, like, tax office UK?
Is that not the same thing?
Because those ladies, I don't know if they have any particular training. I think they might be, you know, if there's a spare parking attendant, they might say, you know what, love, could you do the tax line instead today?
It was probably her. I remember she was called Linda.
I think I've spoken to Linda too.
Oh, I see.
I remember trying to talk to Linda in the Preston tax office about double taxation, because I'd been paid in Germany, taxed in Germany, and I was trying to figure out, do I have to pay tax again? And she was saying, everyone's got to pay tax, love. And I was like, I know, but I already paid it in Germany. And she was, Germany's got naught to do with me, love. And I was like, okay.
That sounds like a very serious conversation, though.
Yeah, it was a bit above Linda's pay grade, I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure she was qualified.
She's probably a minister now, isn't she? Exactly. She's probably Baroness Linda.
She was on the fast track.
She moved into PPE shortly after that.
Oh my gosh. It's been uphill from there. I wonder if that opera is available to see online. I know I have a DVD of it somewhere.
Wow.
But I really loved that production. And I never really expected that I would be in an opera when I started writing it. But being the very economical, efficient, conservative-minded composer that I was back then, it was cheaper to be in it than have to try and find someone else to be in it.
And who else could have filled that role?
Jeremy
something.
Jeremy
He was
something.
definitely called Jeremy.
Yes.
And,
Lavinia Greengarden.
And you had your own wig.
Oh yeah, where did I have the wig? I just happened to have the
You
wig.
happened to have a little sort of grey grandpa wig.
And I had the scarf, the opera scarf.
Yes, you
the
did.
opera director scarf. Can you introduce yourself for anyone who doesn't know you?
Is there anybody who doesn't know me? I am Lauren J. Joseph, and I am a novelist and occasional movie star.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
I read your mind and I said it for you to save you the time.
Thank you. I've definitely known you as other job titles, if you can call them jobs.
Yes, tart with a heart. Yeah. Perfumist?
Oh, that was a very
Perfumeriest?
specific job, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yes, when you worked at Penhaligon's. And I worked around the corner at LK Bennett, selling kitten heels to ladies in the city.
I think you drew the longest straw, however that idiom works.
I don't know, but you never had any customers, which is definitely the longest straw.
But I had two awful managers in a room that was about the size of a telephone booth. And they did absolutely flip all besides harass us and eat Quality Street. And we were never quite sure if it was going to be a day of harassment or Quality Street. So we're always on our toes.
Sounds like my childhood.
I did rearrange all the prices once a day, and none of the customers ever noticed, and nobody thought anything of the fact that a bottle of perfume might be priced at £450, which was actually the price for the jewellery box.
Oh, sure, and then you just pocket the difference.
No, I wasn't, but we did have barcodes, so you had to scan the wretched thing.
That's a shame.
Yeah, but nobody seemed to bother about prices.
Gone are the days of cash money.
It was quite...
And drinks tickets.
Oh, Lord, I do miss drinks tickets.
Yeah, when was the last time you were paid in drinks tickets?
Not for some time, thankfully. Because as well as the difficulties you have with Linda at the Preston tax office about how do I tax myself on drinks tickets, Linda? It makes working relationships a little blurry, doesn't it?
Sure, especially if you use the drinks tickets.
Yeah. Yes, and Lord knows I did use the drinks tickets. You're kind of like, oh yeah, you haven't got the money from me? Oh, that's fine. I'll just have another drink. You wait till... I'll just send you an email next Tuesday and chase it up. And next Tuesday never comes.
No, especially with the drag queens. Gosh, I remember that one drag queen in Liverpool.
Oh,
when
yes.
I was trying to suggest that I might be paid for having gone to Liverpool to play the piano.
Oh, yes, that got quite hairy, actually, didn't it? It was like a sort of... It was like Tootsie meets The Godfather or something, because she was quite intimidating.
Yes, very much so. You're knocking at a very closed door. I remember that phrase.
That was sinister. She was sinister.
But I got my 75 quid or whatever it was, eventually.
At least breakfast was included on that booking.
Oh yeah, was that a Premier Inn or a Travel Lodge?
That was the Adelphi, thank you very much.
Did we stay in the Adelphi?
Yes, we did.
Oh, I see. I remember the building. I don't remember the luxury of staying
It was
there.
not luxury.
Right,
no.
that's probably why
Lord,
then.
no. Those days are gone, I think. It's
For you?
For me. For my days of luxury at the Adelphi Hotel. No, the Adelphi's days of luxury
Oh.
are long gone.
Oh, that's a shame.
Yeah.
And they were already long gone before
Oh,
we
absolutely.
arrived.
I think probably like about the 80s.
Yeah. That does feel like a different life, though. Because when we first met, we were both probably quite different people, I think. And you were performing, and I was also performing quite a lot. I don't really perform at all these days. I remember once you said that you perform in order that your written work can have a platform.
Yeah. That's very true. I always wrote since I was a child, really since I was 8 or so, and intentionally wrote. I lived next door to a woman called Winnie. I think she worked at Greg's. She had all these great horror stories about people scalding themselves on jam donuts that were too hard. And she would buy me little exercise books on the proviso that I would write stories in them. And then I would read them to children in primary school, like the younger children. So I've written forever, really. Since my late teens, I was sending things off to literary agents and editors and really getting absolutely nowhere. Nobody ever said, sorry, you suck, or, like, go back to Penhaligon's. But people just usually said, this is really good, but we don't know if there's a market for it. This is really good, but I don't know what to do with it. And because of that frustrating experience, I needed another avenue, and I was very, very interested when I was at university in live art, and particularly people like Karen Finley and Penny Arcade and Holly Hughes, the sort of 80s, 90s feminist post-punk use of text. And I thought, oh, that's perfect, because all you need is to have a voice, and there you go. You don't really need editors, agents, publishers. You can just write something and put it out into the world like that. And so I did that for quite a long time, actually.
From my perspective, because I trained as a composer, as you know, which is quite a lonely life, if that's what you do full time. And I imagine writing or being a novelist can also be a life of solitude, at least. How does that sit with you compared to the sort of fuller life of community that you might have had before?
I think I have a fuller community now, actually. Nice. I really do, because now I have much more of an intentional community. I'm friends with people that I want to be friends with. And writing is much slower than performance. You know, you might have somebody say, oh, can you do this gig next Saturday? The theme is blah. So you've got to work much more quickly. You might do a piece once or twice and that's it. And you might do a couple of pieces a week. And you might see the same people do a couple of pieces a week. So you're sort of rushing around hectically, seeing a lot of people. But most of those people that I would run around with, be drunk with, do shows with, I didn't ever have dinner with them, really. There's very, very few people out of the, hundreds of people I must have performed with that I would see intentionally, socially, and because I wanted to see them. I think when you're a performer, it can feel like you have a really robust community, but a lot of times you're sort of professionalizing your social life.
And acquaintances.
Yeah, lots of acquaintances. And now I spend time with people who I want to spend time with. My friendships and communities, I think, are a lot more robust. I think it dawned on me during the height of the pandemic, actually, that there was nobody, well, almost nobody, that I knew through performance specifically, who I'd met as a performer, who I might call on if I was in a tight spot. And there were other people in my life who I would, but I hadn't met them because I'd shared a bill with them or been asked to perform at something they'd curated. It's a bit like when you leave nightlife and all those people, they're still in that nightclub, you know what I mean? And sometimes it is not just metaphorically so. I went back to Berlin last February because my book came out in paperback in German, and I saw people there who I hadn't seen since before the pandemic, who were literally going to the same parties and were still in the same K-hole. And I was almost like, is this a gag? Is this a joke? Are you really? Though, nothing has changed? Yeah, our friendship was still in that K-hole, still in that party. And I'm not.
No.
I mean, no shade to them. I mean, if you're having a good time, have a good time. But I feel like I have a more robust set of friends and a more robust community now than I did then, I think.
So rather than just a collection of performers on a London nightlife scene or wherever you were performing, that's sort of a misuse of the word of community.
I think also community it's so exploited as a word, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's so many, oh gosh, how to say this? There's so many cabals of people who get together and say, oh, we're a community. And they're a community for a Moet Chandon commercial or a magazine spread, but the rest of the time they're just crooks, basically, who have scoped something out. There's usually a ringleader who's like, oh, yeah, there's an angle here I can work about how we're a community. Mm-hmm. And they aren't really. It's a marketing angle. And that's sometimes a really hard lesson to learn if you think that you're in community with people and you're not in community with people. You're somebody's marketing exercise.
I've always really enjoyed your perspective on things. I've always learned a lot. Not that you've always been such a sage.
Excuse me.
But at least you're on the way, because you're always thinking about these things.
I think we're all on the way, aren't we? I don't think anybody ever gets there.
Oh gosh. And that's fine.
Yes.
That has to be fine.
Of course. I was listening to something Judith Butler had to say earlier, and they were talking about how you have to be a fool to make progress, because you have to say, I have not aligned myself with reality. I haven't bought into this because this reality sucks and is not fixed and can be changed. So I'm not going to align myself with this because it's not how I want things to be. So I'm going to keep working in this foolish way against that. So we're all on the road to becoming. I think as soon as you think that you know it all or that you know anything, then you're on very thin ice. Then you just start to be nothing but ego. And also you make bad work, I think.
Yeah, that's really articulated something I've maybe never put into words before. But I definitely have a sense that that's how I think about it as well. Especially when it comes to making work and trying to compare yourself, I compare myself to quote-unquote successful artists. And I have a great feeling of accomplishment. And it somehow if you put it through the wrong filter, it doesn't seem to add up. But actually, especially as I get older, I think, no, it's great. The whole point is the journey and enjoying the process.
Yeah, also I think you have to be always wary about comparing yourself to anybody in your personal life or your artistic practice, because what is success? It's so easy to say, this other artist has got 150,000 followers on Instagram and they're in a tequila commercial and they get 5,000 likes per picture. But does that mean that the music they're making is better than the music you're making? Are they more talented than you?
I know that artists now don't like listening to their music, so...
Do you know what I
Probably
mean?
no.
It's a complete nonsense, but that's kind of the lie that we're sold, that that's what success is. I think it's always important to ask, every time an opportunity is presented to you, is where is it that I think that I'm going? What is it I'm trying to achieve? And will this opportunity help me to get there? And you might say, oh, well, a tequila commercial really would. But will it really? It might help you, I don't know, pay for your Botox or something, but will it make you a better musician? Probably not. Probably you'll have a lot of hassle because all of these tequila people will be like, oh, what's this shit? What's this nonsense? You know? And it'll bring you to an audience who maybe you aren't trying to connect with.
Yeah. Some people really, really like tequila.
I quite like tequila, actually.
Yeah, I've definitely tasted it.
Yes.
I like the smokiness, but maybe that's more mezcal.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe you'd prefer a mezcal.
Yeah, maybe. Well, I haven't drunk in a long time, and that's because I'm too old to cope with the hangovers. Who's got time for hangover? I don't.
Not you and not Jane Fonda.
If it's not good enough for Jane Fonda, it's not good enough for me. So you've mentioned a few interesting tangents that I'd like to poke you on. One being your book, the one that's already out and on the shelves internationally.
Yes.
Why don't we start there? At Certain Points We Touch,
Yes.
which is your debut novel.
Yes.
Although you have written other things that have been published before.
I have, yes.
But I think this is definitely kind of next level.
Yeah, I have plays collected in a volume, and I have a novella as well, but yes, this is the first.
Everything Must Go.
Everything Must Go. This is the first novel, and I think, yeah, you're right, it was a really big step. It was the first time I worked with a major publisher, and all the things that entailed. And also, I suppose, referring back to what we were saying about success, I would meet people, you know, at parties or wherever one meets people in John Lewis and say, oh yes, I'm a writer, I have a book coming out. And they'd say, oh, self-published, is it? And I'd say, no, actually, it's out on Bloomsbury. And they'd go, oh, so you're a proper writer. And being on Bloomsbury doesn't make you a proper writer, but it adjusts dramatically how people think of you, which was very eye-opening. If ever I lived under the illusion that we existed in a meritocracy, I was disavowed of that belief, because something like that just reframes you totally. Magazines and newspapers and corporate entities look at you differently and want to work with you and take you a lot more seriously. The amount of money people offer you to do the same things changes. People send you free clothes. Wow. And nothing had changed besides my publisher. I don't think the quality of the work leaped dramatically. I don't think most of those people who sent me free clothes or offered me, do you want to do this, do you want to do that, had read any of the books. So it's a nonsense, really. But it was a very exciting nonsense to make that move.
Well, I'm very excited for you, because the world needs to know.
Yes, and the world's going to know.
Because I'm a self-releasing artist, and I guess proudly so. I have, in theory, been offered little record deal contracts along the way that I just wasn't either ready for or just weren't appropriate for where I was at that time.
It's good to know that about yourself, though.
Yeah.
Because I've seen a lot of people, and I'm sure you have, who, you know, they've started to get something going and then someone's signed them to a big deal and it's just derailed them totally, because they weren't that kind of artist. They were an artist making music slightly left of field, and then they got a deal which required them to have a top 10 album or be landed with £55,000 worth of debt that they hadn't recouped.
Yeah. These were quite small-scale offerings, these deals. I was very grateful to still have a relationship with the label that were offering them, because they were just really nice people. I didn't really see what they might be offering that I couldn't do myself. And one thing I've always felt that differs in our approach is that I've always had I can do everything, I need to do everything, I will have everything under control and do all of the jobs and wear all of the hats. And I think even before you had a publisher and the agent and so on, you've been able to acknowledge, okay, I don't really enjoy doing that, I don't particularly want to do that, so that's a job for someone else.
Well, also I don't really have the skill set to do everything. I mean, in terms of like a theatre show, for example, some people can direct themselves, I can't direct myself. And also, often I was working with other performers on stage, and I didn't have the objectivity to do that. Also, there's lots of things I can do. I can give input to set design, lighting design, costume design, but I can't necessarily realise those things. So I'm happy to hand over, and I wish I would have been able to hand over more, definitely when it came to things like production and balancing the books. Because, I mean, you can remember when we would have we had a 3-week run at Oval House and I was in charge of the money and I have this calculator, I can't read figures. Yeah, I had to deal with paying everybody, making sure we were staying in the black. And actually, we had to wait till the show finished, and then dear Stephen, who was stage managing, had to go through the books with me because it was all backwards. Yeah. We had to go through line by line, 2 months worth of rehearsals and performance, and figure out what money we actually had and didn't have.
Gosh.
There was many things I wish I could have handed off.
Yeah. No, that's inspiring to think that way, because I'm also not the best person to do all of the jobs that I still give myself. One of the biggest changes is handing over the filming of these podcasts to someone who is exquisitely more talented and has more patience and time to do so.
It definitely gives you time to do what you're good at doing if you aren't freaking out about the lighting and how wide the shot is going to be. Yeah. You can, prepare your topics of conversation.
And you've also, I guess, when you've got working relationships with publishers and agents and so on, you've potentially got someone to battle against. Maybe battle is the wrong word, but it's useful sometimes to have kind of a bit of a head-butting friction in order to just go through the motions in your own head. It's very tricky to do that in your own head and be both people.
I'm glad to say that I've never lacked for head-butting or friction in my professional career. Yeah, no, there's been no lack of that. I think I've fought pretty horribly with just about everybody I've ever worked with. And I think a lot of that did have to do with the fact that everyone I worked with was mad and also drunk most of the time. And, if you write a show at 4 o'clock in the morning or decide to do a lighting plan at 4 o'clock in the morning or something like this, those tensions are going to really come to the forefront. And obviously when you do things on a very small budget with people who are really passionate, you can make really great work, but it's at a really high cost.
So more about at certain points we touch, because we've mentioned it in passing.
Yes.
And it was a big moment for you in terms of being taken seriously by the outside world.
Yeah, really. Opened up a lot of doors for me, absolutely. I got to write for really interesting publications like Granta, and started writing for The Guardian and The Observer, towards whom I have very mixed feelings. They've been very supportive, so...
We did our little photo shoot, I'm just remembering now.
Yes,
was that for The Observer?
Did. That was for The Observer, yes.
Yeah. Do you remember what the piece was? Was it for a piece you'd written?
It was about the book.
Oh, right, great.
Yes. You just turned up, you're like, here I am, what is this? Is it another Twix commercial?
Do we get our own hair, people, or do I have to share yours?
With Jenny, she was fab.
The pictures looked gorge. I remember you saying there was definitely a step change in the way that they allowing you to have a bit of editing at your pleasure afterwards, compared to your modelling days where...
Oh god, that was horrible. I still have nightmares about modelling. And occasionally someone tags me in a picture. I'm I'm like, no. I thought this was before the internet. Although it obviously wasn't.
But you have the bone structure either way.
I'm doomed.
It's the gift that keeps on giving.
Even if you don't want it.
I know. So how does the old book, at some points we touched, the old book, how does that connect to your new book?
Oh, that's such a big question. Stylistically, I think they're somewhat similar. They share a sense of humour. They're both quite robust in their references. The protagonist in At Certain Points We Touch, JJ, and the protagonist in Lean Cat Savage Cat, the new book, Charlie, are both people who have a really wide system of references. So they talk about contemporary art, the Bible, old movies, queer theory. So they both share that quite expansive system of references.
Are they both you, in that case?
Are they both me? No, neither of them are me, but the narrative voice and the voice of the character is also closer to my voice than other things I might have written. For example, Everything Must Go is distinct. But I think about these two novels, At Certain Points We Touch and Lean Cat Savage Cat, as sort of operating in that way that In Search of Lost Time does, that you have Proust, the writer, who's present as like the writer, in a way that almost foreshadows like the new novel and of the mid-century, where you would have what's now called autofiction, where you were very aware of the writer as being observing what they were writing about. So you have that voice, and then the voice of the character that Proust's writing about, and then you have the sort of the third level of the narrative, which is that character looking back on themselves as a child. So there's a kind of triangulation of voices in both of those novels. They aren't me, but this combination of where the narrator is today, the narrator looking back, and the narrative voice, which is that of the writer, that blend is closer to me than pure fiction. It's murky, it's always murky. I went to see Garth Grenwell talk about his latest book, Small Rain, and somebody asked him if it was autofiction, because the book is about a man who's in hospital, who's had a sudden health crisis and doesn't know if he's going to live or die. And that happened to Garth. And so somebody said, well, is this autofiction? This happened to you, you know. And he said, you know, when a painter paints a picture, they mix pigment and flaxseed oil, and you go and look at it, and you don't look at that painting and say, I wonder how much flax is in that. I wonder how much acrylic. And he said, that's the art of it, that something happens, and how you treat the material is the art of it, you know. So, and then he really railed against the whole idea of autofiction, saying, would you call St. Augustine autofiction?
What do you think, because that sounds like fighting against the concept a little bit, what might be the problem with it?
For me or for Garth Grenwell?
For you.
I think that largely it's a marketing term, because it's applied to everything from Marguerite Duras to, what's his name, Knausgaard? Is that his name, Karl Ove Knausgaard? I've never read any of it, but likewise you could also apply it to James Baldwin, Marcel Proust, or St. Augustine. Anybody who's ever experienced anything and written about it could be autofiction. I think it's like a marketing term that has become so widely used and misused, because there is a certain kind of work, maybe like The Lover, I think, Marguerite Duras' The Lover, where she's literally talking about herself as both the character and the writer, saying, I am looking at the sea, he is coming towards me, and you're aware of a writer almost as like a black box recorder or something, which you could say is explicitly autofiction.
Even that is filtered through her writing voice.
I think if you opt in to be a writer of autofiction, that's one thing. I basically think the major problem for me and why I've come to resist it is because people collapse autofiction in with memoir, and they say that it becomes very, very blurry. It's like everything that you've written down on the page is a fact, actually happened, like a memoir, which is, there is a distinction, but that's kind of been erased, I think, the more we talk about autofiction. But also, every writer is always writing from life. It doesn't matter, you know, Charles Dickens might not have lived in Paris during the French Revolution, but when he was writing A Tale of Two Cities, he understood how people interact. He'd met people, he'd been in love, he'd had his heart broken, he'd had good times and bad times, and that informs all of the characters, even if he wasn't living in, revolutionary France. So you could even, I suppose, say, well, isn't his emotional understanding of the world a form of autofiction?
I recognise when I write songs that they're all from personal experience. And because there's that extra level of music, and when writing lyrics, it's a bit more... I've got more rules that I impose upon myself to, I guess, a sort of poetic rules, just about, rhyming structure and syllables and rhythm and so on. It immediately becomes far more abstract, and I actually feel like I have to fight to try and keep connecting it back to myself and trying to convince and tell people this is literally just me, as though saying my story directly from that unspoken place, and it's been filtered through this kaleidoscope of this now a song that's kind of a digestible thing to take in. So it's interesting to hear you kind of fight back against the idea of, some of the lines from a certain point we touch where I think I can recognise myself in that character, and you remember what I said more than I can, but that's 99% sure what I said, because you've got an impeccable memory.
It's also the thing about how the person who tells the story or becomes the historian also becomes the authority on that story and on that history. I thought about writing that book as really employing a technology of manipulation, because obviously the through line of how we loved somebody and lost somebody is true. But that could be a short story, could be a song, could be a painting. But in order to make it a novel, I needed to really invent a lot to make the reader invest in that story and to devastate the reader in a way that was really going to be effective. And so because of that, I had to invent a lot of stuff, heighten a lot of stuff. Whereas life is kind of messy, a novel does need a certain amount of beats to tie up nicely in a way that doesn't happen in life. So much of it is constructed. The emotional truth is there, but I was trying to manipulate the reader into feeling terrible, to really caring about this person and really being pained by his death.
As though it were happening to them for the first time.
Yeah.
Which is when it's always the worst.
Exactly.
It reminds me a bit of how a theatre director might try and adapt a novel into a stage play where it's a different format and it has to work differently for it to be as effective. It wouldn't work if someone was just literally reading the novel on stage.
No. I mean, every time you put a play on stage, you're sort of creating a new version of it, aren't you? Because you have a new audience each time as well, and they're bringing everything they've seen and everything they've experienced in their life, and they're sort of co-authoring that production with you. And I think it's the same with books. I think people read that novel differently now, even 3 years after it was written, than they might have done then, because they'll have read other books and seen other movies.
Is there a kind of writing that you prefer? Because obviously you have written for stage, and you've written for zines, and you've written novella, which is, and shorter work, which is obviously different to novel.
I really like writing novels, actually, and I think that it shares a lot with what I wrote for the stage, because what I wrote for the stage always had this... They were basically monologues, and they had this one voice that you followed, and they moved between kind of philosophical meandering and then something very irreverent. And I think as a novelist I still do that. I still try to pose some big questions, but then I'm kind of very dry with the phrasing.
I would say that's definitely part of your personality as well.
Yeah.
Maybe it's being a Gemini, who knows?
A good rule of thumb is to sort of take your work seriously, but maybe don't take yourself seriously. And I think that I'm trying to communicate that. Like, I'm serious about what I'm writing about, but I also know that it's just a book. It's just my opinion. I'm not staking a claim on authority for how reality functions with these books. It's my sort of experience of and reflections on.
It's a lot to juggle when you're still in the balance of finding that balance, in the process of finding that balance. But I think once you arrive there, it just feels very second nature. You know your own rules for living, and you know your own approach to the world, and therefore you can just get on with the act of the writing. Or is it are you constantly in battle with how much is this fiction versus me?
No, I don't really worry about that. I'm constantly in battle with trying to clear the desk to actually sit down and write.
Sure.
Because there's always a million other things that, there's lots of commissions on the Substack and book reviews. So that's the big battle, is to do all of that and think, okay, now I've got 2 days next week where I'll actually be able to write. Once I've finished all my writing, I can sit down and write. That's the big battle.
Your Substack, I love receiving your emails every 2 weeks in my inbox. And they're always so different. They're always completely you, but they're always very, very different in approach and style and length. And
that's why I wanted to do it, actually, because I've often found writing short form pieces to be kind of a challenge, and so I wanted to get better at it. And also because publishing is so slow. So it's 2 years between having completed Lean Cat Savage Cat and when it will be published next January. That is such a long period of time. And so I needed something to be working on in the meantime. But also Substack is a little bit, the stakes are a little lower. So I can really write about whatever I want. And I don't have an editor or an agent or anybody else saying, I don't really know about this, or I don't know if now's the time for that idea. Or it's still a commitment, I must say, to try and do 2 a month. It seems like it shouldn't be any work at all, but it is, trying to fit it in. I've had a lot of people who've read it and said, I really like that piece. Would you like to write for blah, blah, blah? Which is great.
so then you get even more on your plate.
Yeah, well, exactly. And then writing another book just disappears on the horizon.
Can you tell us about the new one? I guess it's finished, right, at this point?
Oh, most definitely, yes. It's called Lean Cat Savage Cat, and it's about a girl who's kind of, I don't know, a little aimless. She's kind of a messy character, and somebody she meets at a party one night says, oh, you should really go to Berlin, you'd love it there, it's so you. And she's like, yeah, I'll do that, I'm going to go to Berlin, it's so me. And ends up in Berlin, out of her depth, quite quickly out of her depth. And it's a book that starts off quite frothy, quite sort of like a light social satire, very much in the world of Evelyn Waugh and Nancy Mitford, and then takes a turn and becomes quite dark quite quickly.
American Psycho dark.
Yeah. I mean, yes, there's a lot less murder. There's a couple of nods to American Psycho, but it does share that balance of, I think when you read American Psycho, by the end of it you think, wait, what? Did that happen? Was it a hallucination? Did some of it happen? So I'm hoping to have generated something like that. Also maybe Pale Fire is a good reference. The Nabokov novel, where you could read that book in 3 different ways and any of them would really hold water. It's an ambiguous book, it's quite funny. It's a book about the creative life and about parties, but it's also a book about addiction and psychosis and unprocessed grief.
Gosh, can't wait to read it.
It's a lot of fun, though, I must say.
As in funny, like haha?
It can be. There are a couple of characters in there who I think are very funny. And then it's funny as well in the way of being unsettling.
Sure. Oh, I like both of those. Sounds like all my favourite shows. So when is that out again?
January 26th. And then
That will fly by.
February 26th in the States.
Oh, that's exciting. Congratulations.
Thanks so much.
Have you got the cover sorted and everything?
Actually, I saw a draft for the American cover this week, but I haven't seen the UK cover yet.
What do you think about American book covers?
My agent put it so well when I shared the drafts with my agent. She said, they're very unfamiliar in the way that US jackets often are. And it's like, you are an agent. That's a way of saying, leave me out of this, without saying that. I'm very glad to have an editor and a team in the States who are open to feedback.
Yeah.
So we're talking about fonts and colours rather. So.
Yeah. Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Is that your happy place?
No, I've learnt to stop second guessing myself and say, I prefer this option, what's not working, the colour, okay? And then to have like a half-hour Zoom instead of 10 emails back and forth saying, no, that's not quite what I meant.
Yes, because there's more to be getting on with, like finding time to write.
So much is lost in email, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or what you're actually trying to say.
So what do you like to do if you ever have any spare time that you've elbowed into your schedule? Is there any?
I really love baking and I love the movies. I spend a lot of time at the movies. Book readings, the movies, baking. I'm a big fan of lunch as well, actually. I really love going to lunch. Mm.
Lunch is our big meal of the day.
You feel like skipping school, don't you, when you're going to lunch? I think it's much better for you to...
Yeah, I imagine so. I mean, I'm still, peckish later on, but if I've had a big breakfast, then I'm desperate for a big lunch as well.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, I think it's very good for your metabolism.
I believe in big lunches.
Yeah, but I know the feeling about it feels like you're skipping out on work or something. Because if you actually take time to cook, eat, slightly digest, then it's easily an hour out of your day. At peak time when you're still awake. And then, of course, when you start nodding off at 3 p.m.
I also really like going out for lunch because then you avoid all the Instagram girlies.
Oh, right. You're there in the evening.
Yeah, because if you go out for dinner, you've got that whole circus.
Which places are you having lunch at? Are they Insta-girly spots?
Everywhere's an Insta-girly spot. I went to Spence Bakery in Stoke Newington to buy a loaf of bread, and for some reason, there was a queue out the door of like 50 people all taking pictures of cupcakes. And at first I thought, is this a school trip? And then I was like, no, it's the TikTok girlies. They're all here because this Spence Bakery is having a moment. I don't know why, but...
What did you have from the bakery?
I was just buying a loaf of bread. And there was a little Turkish grandpa who was in there because he wanted to buy... His wife was German, tell me all about it. And he wanted to buy Roggenbrot. And he could only get it there at Spence Bakery. We had a lot of time in that line to talk about it. People always want to tell me everything.
Yes, you do have that aura.
I don't know why.
I mean, I've already said it all to you before we pressed record, so I'd much prefer to hear what you have to say. I mean, you can never expect what will come out of your mouth, but I know it'll be a good time.
Well, put that on my tombstone.
After Lean Cat, Savage Cat,
Yes.
then what is there to look forward to? It must be such a strange thing to have finished a big body of work like that, or one big work. Obviously, you're still writing a Substack and whatever you're being commissioned.
I'm writing another book.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
Already on the case.
Yeah, well, it takes like a long time to write them and a long time for them to come out into the world. Yeah, I mean, but it's the same as, I mean, you make music, then you've got to record it, then you've got to mix it, then you've got to master it, and then you've got to shoot the cover art.
Well, you know that as well.
Yeah, it's a long, long process.
You've made music.
I have made music. And also plays, You write a play and then you edit a play. You show a play to somebody, they like it and say, okay, we'll put it on next October. Then you raise the money for the play. And by the time you're rehearsing the play, it's several years old to you.
Yeah.
Or in movies as well. You make a movie and that also takes forever. So you just have to keep ticking along. What's weird is when you have to come back to do press for a project and you're onto something else. Yeah. Sometimes, especially if you have to do like a long jag with at certain points we touch. I was on tour for about 18 months, just talking about it everywhere, just everywhere. And by the end of that, people would say, oh, I love that bit in Greece. And I was saying, in Greece? There's no scene in Greece. And they say, no, there is. And I'd say, okay, well, I'm glad you liked that bit because I had completely forgotten.
Do you ever reread the work then?
No, of course not. Oh. I don't reread it. I usually have a chapter or two that if there's an event that I read at, that I go to.
And it's the same chapter?
There's a couple, yeah.
Okay.
But no, I don't read over it. But I also never, if I'm in a film or someone sends me footage of a play, I don't watch that either. I've got tons of stuff on hard drives that I just haven't looked back on because what would I do? Say, oh, I should have said that line better. Or wasn't I great?
There's always Throwback Thursday.
Yeah, I suppose so. I could crop a little clip from Top Girls and pop that up.
Yeah. Give the people what they want.
Yes, which is me as an 80s secretary.
Oh yes, Top Gun. I wish I'd seen that.
It was really good, I have to say.
Liza Minnelli.
Yes.
Should we explain where Liza Minnelli comes from?
Oh, yes.
It's just so second nature to us.
I believe that's because we're in a performance piece which was called I'm the Famous One in This Relationship. And it was called that because Liza Minnelli had just divorced her 15th husband, David Guest. And it was in the newspaper at the time that whilst they were divorcing, she'd hit him with a telephone and said, I'm the famous one in this relationship. And I thought, what a fantastic title. So wrote a show about somebody who went to see their doctor because they were having delusions and hallucinations that they were Liza Minnelli. And the therapist said to them, I think you're sick with Liza Minnelli influenza. And then everybody in the cast succumbed, how do you conjugate that, to Liza Minnelli influenza, until everybody on stage was saying, you're not Liza Minnelli, you're not Liza Minnelli, I'm Liza Minnelli. Yeah. And since then, everybody we know has been Liza Minnelli.
I just remember, you're not Liza Minnelli, you're just a very naughty boy.
Wait, no, that's from Monty Python. That's the life of Brian.
Where does Mariah Carey come into it?
Oh, because the conceit in the show was that the only way to recover from Liza Minnelli influenza would be that Mariah Carey would have to give you the antidote, I think.
Right. From her wheelchair.
Well, she had a wheelchair because Rhiannon Stiles played Mariah Carey, and she decided, because she was very avant-garde, that she would come on in a wheelchair. And I don't know why, but I do remember watching her get made up, and she was so talented with her makeup. And that night she sort of dipped her fingers in and just rubbed it on and did that with the wig. So it was all cockeyed, and she said, when you're doing one of your shows, you just slap it on, don't you? That's part of the ethos. And I was like, you know what? You're not wrong. So she came on in her wheelchair.
Well, shall we wrap it up? Deep down to you, what's the point?
What's the point of what?
That's the question. I didn't write the question. I just wrote the question.
I just held the pencil. The question wrote itself.
It's very open-ended.
What is the point? My friend John told me this weekend that he'd seen a lecture from Henry Nouwen, who was a Dutch theologian. And Henry Nouwen said in this discussion, Christ called us to be fruitful, not productive. And he said, I think we need to consider that a bit more. So I think that's the point. Even if you're not religious, even if you're not Christian, be fruitful, not productive. Your life is not to be lived in a way just to constantly generate and market, but you must be fruitful, have roots.
The roots, that's a nice analogy. I love that. Thank you for sharing.
You're very welcome.
And thank you for the very funny catch-up, because I haven't seen you this year.
Has it really been?
Yeah, well, because we normally have a cup of tea, and we were texting about when this recording might happen. But I've not seen you. I need to see you more.
Off camera, even. Do you remember, did you ever watch In Bed with Madonna?
I don't know if I ever actually saw it. I know I was aware of it.
Such a cultural moment. There's a scene where it's Madonna and her boyfriend at the time, Warren Beatty, and he's saying to her, can we just talk? Can we just turn the cameras off? And she's like, no, they've got to get this. They've got to get this. And he's like, see, with her, she doesn't even want to live off camera. And
exactly.
That, that's you. You're Madonna in this situation.
Well, thank you. And thank you.
Thank you.
Gorge. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, and review this podcast. And if you like it, share it with your friends or on social media. You can find me on social platforms at Deep Down with Jordan Hunt and at Jordan Hunt Music. Deep Down uses bits of my music from my song Ocean Floor, and you can listen to my music on all streaming services. I'd love to hear from you via DM or via my website, jordan-hunt.com, if any of these experiences resonated with you, and there you can sign up to the mailing list for announcements and updates. Thank you so much for listening.